Today, I will be sharing with you my views on the procedural and ethical considerations on research report writing. So let me share my screen. Here I am getting a message only meeting organizers and presenters can share.
Ma'am, I'll just make you the presenter. Just a minute. Ma'am, I've made you the presenter.
Let me check.
Yes, ma'am.
It's taking a while. Let me try again.
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Can you see my slide?
Ma'am, I cannot see it right now. Participants, can you see the slides?
I can
No,
see.
not yet. It's not audible. It's not visible. No.
Ma'am,
Can
now
you?
your slides are visible. Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So let us see the details. So as I told you, we will be analyzing today what are the procedure and ethical consideration the researcher should keep in mind while attempting writing the report. So could you please tell me what is a report? So our topic is how to write a research report. So what is the report for you? You can give me answer to this.
Ma'am, report could be summing up of all the research that we have done in a concise form.
Okay. Okay, Sri. Anyone else? Any other attempts? Any other inputs?
It may be any detail of something.
I didn't get that completely. It may be any detail.
Yeah, detail on statement with respect to something. If we
Okay.
go as the dictionary meaning of it. Yeah.
Okay. Here, I take this research report in a very general sense. I don't mean here only the project reports, because usually we undertake projects. The projects can be given to us by any organization, governmental or non-governmental. It may be from an NGO. Usually we write to UGC to give us minor projects, major projects, and there can be other ministries, departments. For example, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha Secretariat, they all used to give various projects to various universities, various schools, various colleges. And likewise, you can also see that the Ministry of Law and Justice, every year they give lot many projects, wherein you can claim even 50 lakhs rupees, 75 lakhs rupees, etc. as your project fund or the project money. So there are so many departments, so many ministries, and so many non-governmental organizations where you can apply for getting a research project. Apart from this, even you may know that the World Bank and other international institutions also are ready to give projects to developing countries, especially the colleges and universities of India, because they are doing a lot of empirical research in the Asian region. So when we talk about a research report, immediately it is the report which you have to produce after conducting a project, a research project. That is what coming to your mind. But in this discussion, I keep the research report in a very wide and general sense. It can be a report that you have to prepare after conducting a project like this, or it can also be an article or any other assignment that you have to write after conducting a doctoral research also. So that's why I have told you I am keeping it in a very general sense, because sometimes it happens that all of us are not very much deeply involved in conducting an actual field research. So then what is the use of only concentrating on writing a report after conducting an empirical study? So those who are not having any projects at hand, not be disappointed now, because I already explained that I am considering this report as a very general here. So we will be discussing the aspect that one need to take care of when one has to present the findings in an article, when one has to write a article after conducting a doctoral study, or writing a standard report after conducting an empirical study as well. So as you can see from this slide, writing the report is the last phase of the journey of research. It is the medium by which researcher communicates with his audience. And here I simply put his audience. And here everyone has to think about that hypothetical audience. Because it's not the entire country, it's not the entire world, it's not the entire academic community that we are talking about here as audience. Because in order to determine who will be the audience in a particular research report, the answer should be given having reference to very nature and purpose of the research. So of course, if it is entrusted by someone, of course, to that department, to the ministry, to the NGO, to the World Bank, as the case may be, we will be submitting it. And they will be evaluating, because they have to take some policy decisions, or they may bring certain amendments, as the case may be. So who is going to read this? If you are writing an article, then it can be the entire academic community. It can be the legal fraternity, as the case may be. Or you are criticizing a particular judgment, even the judge who wrote the judgment, other brother judges, they all will be reading about this. So who is going to be the audience should be there in your mind, because according to that, you have to set your tune, you have to set your language. So this is very important. It's a medium by which the researcher communicates with his audience. Then the report is the way, or report is the means by which he shared with the audience the research problem investigated, the methods used for collection of data, their analysis and interpretation, and the results or the findings of the study. And it's going to be the first-hand account of research process. And it must present the whole result of the inquiry in sufficient detail. So this is what I would like to present as the introductory slide. Now let us see the details. So can anyone read the points in this slide? Otherwise, it will be quite monotonous. I only will be reading, and I don't know whether the participants are actively involved, whether they are listening or not. So can anyone volunteer to read this slide? Then I will explain it.
Sure, ma'am.
Thank you.
Sure, ma'am. Yeah, sure, ma'am. I will read it. No hard and fast rules pertaining to the contents and format of a research report. Do I need to read all
Yes,
in a
yes,
go, ma'am?
you read completely.
All right. All right, ma'am. It has to be presented in such a manner that the readers grasp the context, methodology, and findings easily. It must contain the problem undertaken for investigation, objectives, methodology adopted in the inquiry, analysis and inferences of investigation, recommendation. You need not give complete description of what has been done during your research.
Yes. This should be the primary understanding one need to have for sitting to write the report. Okay. So if someone asks you what is the best model of writing a report, of course we don't have a ready-made model. We don't have any hard and fast rule, because as I told you, the very nature and purpose of the research will determine all these questions. So you have to see, as far as the problem in your hand is concerned, as far as the nature of your problem, the research title is concerned, the research topic is concerned, what's going to be the best method for you to write the report? Are you going to publish it in the book form? Are you going to publish it in a standard report style? When I will just explain you what is the standard report style. So when on the one hand I say that there is no hard and fast rule, at the same time I say that there is a standard form, which I will be explaining in the coming slides. Okay, so otherwise you can say that it's the very nature of the problem, the nature of the area that you are researching. And of course, there can be certain requirements that the particular agency which has entrusted you with the research, if it is a sponsored project, as I told you, because they may give you sometimes a style sheet, sometimes they may give you certain guidelines. We want the report might be in separate volumes. We may require the report in this particular style and fashion. Then, of course, as they are the sponsoring authority, we need to comply with their requirements. And if, as I told you, sometimes you are writing an article, and writing an article is not an overnight affair. You have to read for months together. You will collect material, and you will also collect material to substantiate your arguments, or sometimes to counter someone else's arguments, as the case may be. So you have collected lot of material, and how you have to organize your idea, and how you have to format and style a particular article. Again, here I would say, if you have a particular journal in your mind, you have to look into that journal's requirement. Usually every journal will give you a style sheet. They will give you certain instructions to the contributor, certain instructions to the author. So what is the particular style and format that particular journal is requiring? For example, we have the Journal of Indian Law Institute, we have the Journal of the Constitutional and Parliamentary Studies. You also have the journal from the Institute of Public Administration. So some journals wherein all law faculty intend to publish their articles. So I gave you these 2-3 examples. So if you are familiar with the 3 famous journals that I have told you right now, so it can be Journal of Indian Law Institute, a very standard one which goes to more than 100 countries. You may have even Bar Council of India, because our regulatory authority is BCI. So you know that BCI has a journal. So all of you might have seen BCI's journal, Bar Council of India's journal. All of you might have seen the Institute of Public Administration's journal. Likewise, the Constitutional and Parliamentary Studies journal. So if you compare these articles appearing in these 4 different journals, you can understand that their get-up. So let me use that what you call that particular word, get-up. The get-up of this article is different. I'm not talking anything about the quality of the article or the contents of the article now. At this stage, I am not talking anything about it. I'm only talking about the style and the format. So the way they do their formatting, their style is entirely different. So if I have an article and I have written it to Journal of Indian Law Institute to publish, and they have rejected it for some reasons, Now the same article I want to send to Bar Council of India. I cannot send in the same way that I have sent to Journal of Indian Law Institute, because their requirements, their footnoting style and their format is different from that of Bar Council of India. So as an author, I will be looking into the author's instruction for Bar Council of India or the Journal of Institute of Public Administration, as the case may be. Accordingly, I will be reformatting and restyling it. So I think this is, now you could appreciate when I said that you have to see what is the audience, where you need to send it. This should be in your mind if you are writing an article after conducting a good research. And if it is a project report after conducting a project, maybe doctrinal or non-doctrinal as the case may be, then according to that particular format, you have to write this. If the entrusting agency has given you the format, you simply follow their requirements. And if there is no format is given, they have only told you, you write according to a standard format, then how you will go about. That's what we are going to see now. It has to be presented in such a manner that the readers grasp the context. And again here, what you can read in between the lines is the audience, because I told you the audience is the most important aspect for us as the researchers when we sit to write the report. Who is going to read this? Are you going to present your report to the President of India? Sometimes that can also be possible. You conduct a very good research and your research study you are sending to Rashtrapati Bhavan. Sometimes you are submitting your report to Prime Minister's office or to Law Minister as the case may be, or to the Supreme Court Chief Justice you are going to submit your research report. There is no harm in it, and you can do that also. It is not something impossible. You can recommend, you can suggest for changes in law. You can tell that there was a fault in the legal system that had happened. So it can be anyone. It can be anyone, it can be any authority, it can be any institute, or it can be any department, or it can be any non-governmental organization as the case may be, wherein you need to submit the report. So who is going to read this? If it is an article, as I told you, the students might read, the academicians might read, the judges might read, the lawyers might read, the legislators might read, or any general public might read. Or sometimes you may be writing an article for the newspaper. So there are many people, many faculties who continuously write for newspapers, especially newspapers like Indian Express, the Hindu, etc. They publish legal articles quite often. So many of us are writing to these newspapers as well. So there the style is different. They usually permit you to write 1,000 words. 900 words they say, and maximum what we can write is 1,000 words. So then everything you have to incorporate in that 1,000 words. So there, of course, our style might be different, our language might be different, because you have a general audience. They are not only legal audience. So those non-legal persons who are reading your law article or law piece also should understand what actually you want to communicate. So it has to be present in such a manner that the readers grasp the context, methodology, and the findings easily. And when you are writing a newspaper report, of course, methodology might not play much role, because there we are not even telling that whatever you have written is after conducting a doctoral research or a non-doctoral research. So no, it might not be having any role. But when you are writing an actual project report, or when you are writing an article into certain journals, when I said certain journals, you can see that most of the Scopus interest journals now, and say journals when you talk about, you can understand that they all require articles in a particular style, wherein you talk about your research methodology, wherein you talk about your literature review, wherein you talk about your the results and the discussion. So there is a particular style sheet that they give. You have to meet these requirements. Of course, if you haven't read these journals, and I'm sure that you might have read it already, because how you can complete your PhDs, even how you can effectively teach in your classes without referring to the indexed journals and the search journals. So when you read these journals there, you can see that, as I have told you, they are not simply beginning with an abstract introduction, then they come to the conclusion. No, you need to tell them what was your research problem, what is the methodology that you have used, what is literature review that you have done, and all these explanations that you need to give there. Okay, so, and this must contain the problem undertaken for the investigation, your objectives, the methodology, analysis and inferences, recommendations, and as you can see in the last bullet point, we are not writing in the report. Even if it is a full-fledged project report, we are not writing a complete description of what all we have done during our research. Somebody else can read this slide.
Sure, ma'am, I'll read. General outlay. Preliminary pages, the main text, and the end matter. Preliminary title, acknowledgement, preface, table of contents, table of cases, abbreviations, and list of tables, figures, charts. Third point, main text, chapters with appropriate captions, including introduction, conclusions, and recommendations, chapters, heading, subheading, footnotes. End matter, bibliography, interview or questionnaire, annexures, and index. Optional is abstract, literature review, limitations, and executive summary.
Okay, thank you, Sri. So there are, this everybody knows. I'm just making you to recollect only. This is just a revision of what we have studied and what we are teaching, even our scholars. So you all might be having your scholars under you. But the people who are doing dissertation, the thesis as the case may be. So we have preliminary pages, main text, and the end matter. And I need not give you explanation to all this. It's not necessary that every research report should have list of tables, figures, and charts. It's quite common that you have a report without any table, without figure, or without chart also. So you cannot assess and evaluate a journal only by looking into the preliminary pages, whether it has got a table, figure, and charts. Even if it doesn't have a list of tables, figures, and charts, and even if the report doesn't have any tables, figures, and charts, it can still be a very good research. Okay, and I have underlined the table of cases. Because why? I have seen that there are some organizations, or there are some even the mentors who always insist that table of cases should be incorporated in the list of bibliography. So there is no, again, hard and fast rule here as to where the table of cases should go. So as a mentor, or as a team leader in a research, or as a principal investigator in many research, I may always prefer that let the table of cases come in the preliminary part itself. I'm comfortable when the table of cases is there in the preliminary part itself. But I have seen a couple of researchers, research reports, and even I know there are many senior supervisors also who always prefer that let the table of cases find a place in the bibliography itself. Okay, so here you have to do this according to the requirements. In the main text, as generally what we do, from introduction to conclusion, you have chapters, and every chapter will have proper headings and subheadings. And it's necessary that once you conduct a report, you need to give recommendations. Unless and until the very nature of the research doesn't permit to do so. I will give an example for this. Sometimes it may happen that some authority has told you, you have to do a research and give a report of the causes of something. Why this particular situation has arisen? What are the causes to happen this particular legal problem? So there you may be required to only talk about the causes, or you may not be supposed to talk about the recommendations. They only want to see the problem. They only want to see the causes. But if the very nature of the research problem is not limited to something else, wherein you are excused not to give recommendations, then I would always suggest that a researcher should give recommendations whenever there is a possibility to do so. Because anyone can easily find out the cause. Anyone can easily find out the problem. But how to overcome that? Your recommendations and alternative suggestions are very important. And as a person who have studied a particular problem in depth, you are the best one to do these recommendations. And if the recommendation part is not there, then I would say that it is not giving any addition to the existing literature. So if you have to give addition to the existing literature, then there should be proper recommendations and suggestions. Then you can say, in the end matter, the footnotes, I will be again taking up the point, the footnotes, because usually no one gives much importance to writing footnotes. But actually that is something very wrong. And I think in the previous class that I have with this batch, I told you that in the footnoting, when you do your footnoting, it should be consistent and it should be complete. Right now, I am editing a book, and the book is getting published through Thomson Reuters. So yesterday I was having my discussion with the editors, the editorial team of Thomson Reuters, and already once I have edited the chapters and I have submitted them, but the queries that they are asking again back to me, these all are pertaining to footnote, because sometimes the respective authors, they haven't written a particular page number. So the editors are very much particular that there should be the specific page number mentioned, or you have referred the page number, but you haven't referred which is the edition of the book. So they are very much particular. The edition also should come, unless and until the book doesn't have more than one edition. So if no edition is meant, then it is presumed that it is first edition. But if the book has gone for a second edition, then you need to specify whether you have referred to the first edition or the second edition. And another issue that I was facing yesterday was they also want to know the location of the publisher. For example, when you are referring to the Oxford University Press, OUP, they have, even in Oxford, they have their press, and even in other countries, they have their press unit. For example, they publish from Delhi. They also publish from South Africa. So we need to write whether it is a particular place, in which continent, in which country, in which place, in which state. You need to write that. If it is India, Delhi, the place you have to specify. So whether I thought that the footnote is otherwise complete, it has got the author's name, it has got the title, the book chapter, the year of publication, the publisher's name, everything is there. It is a complete citation. No. Again, they send it back by telling you have to locate the particular place where the press is located. If it has got only one place, it's okay. But when they have multiple presses all over the world or in different parts of the country, we need to specify that also. Because what I am telling is, they say that the editorial policy is getting changed. They want to become perfect editors. So they have employed almost 700 plus people in editing itself. You just see, in editing the book itself, they have appointed 700 editors who has got requisite language knowledge, the linguistic knowledge, and also the legal skills, because we are talking about the editing of the law books. So it's not a not a small business that we are talking about. So they read the chapter more than 10 times before it going to the press, before it going for printing. And when we interact with Oxford University people, they say that they have thousands and thousands of people in the field who read the chapters minimum 25 times before it goes for printing. So you see how much importance is attached to editing and proofreading, so that their work should be mistake-free. So what I understand when I interact with these people from the editorial teams of reputed presses and the printing organization is that even they cross-check every footnote. And when we write a particular link as the website link, they even visit the link to see whether the link is active or not. Because if I have received, say, for example, 20 queries yesterday, more than 5 queries related to the link, and they say that this link is not active, so we need to give them alternative link. So you have to give the link with the date of access. When you have accessed the particular link, the date last visited, and most of the style sheets of the journals, usually they prefer that this is a particular model by which you have to record in the footnoting that particular date of visit. It can be a date of visit or date of last access, or it can date last modified also. Because different, as I told you, different journals have different styles, but you have to give the complete link with the date. And if you go for an international journal publication, they will also ask for the time when you have visited the link. Not only the date, even the time you have to give. So, but in India, we have seen that most of the researchers and writers are not giving importance to this complete footnoting. We call it as complete and responsible footnoting, so that nothing you are leaving. Everything is very clear. And another bad tendency that we are seeing from Indian researchers is that sometimes they copy it from another person's footnote. They haven't cross-checked it, but they simply copy from the footnote that they could find in somebody else's work. We are not supposed to do that. And then if you are doing it, you have to mention it. Suppose is Shireen's footnote I have found in some books, then I would quote her and then I would say that in which book I have found also. Then only it will become the complete reference. This we have to keep in mind. So in the end matter, usually you end with the bibliography, and if it is an empirical research, then of course the interview questions that you have prepared, the questionnaires that you have prepared, or it can be a small report of the interview, you have to annex to that. Okay, so and index, of course, in dissertations and theses, and when we write an article to a journal, we do not have an index, but when it is a project report, when it is a books, it's always ideal to have the index. Then again, I am telling you, always you have to look at the requirements of the agency who has entrusted you with the project. And suppose there is no sponsoring agency, it is a personal project which you have initiated. Out of your research and academic interest, you have initiated a project. Then of course you will be designing what will be the research report, what should be the shape, what should be the design that you have to give, and accordingly you can arrange it. But I would say that it's always better to have an abstract, because abstract gives you almost what's a good summary than, because in the introduction you are not giving the complete idea, you are just introducing the topic. But of course in the abstract you will be telling what you have done and what actually different parts of the article or the project is going to deal with. So ideally there can be an abstract as well. And as I told you, I always prefer to have a literature review in all the projects that generally I do. And even if there is no such a specific requirement from the interesting agency, you may have a literature review. Then it's always good to add limitations, because it's not easy to cover everything under the sun relating to that particular topic, because you have your time constraints, you have your financial constraints, and as I told you, you have a specific problem and you have defined its scope. Limiting and delimiting techniques you might have exercised it. So there you have to write actually what is the limitation. Say for example, if I talk about celebrity rights. Okay, I'm studying celebrity rights only with respect to copyright law. Or I am studying artificial intelligence. I am studying artificial intelligence only with respect to patent law. And other kinds of IPR or other human rights issues I am not considering. So what is the limitation that you have to explain here? And nowadays, it's every standard research has got an executive summary. So if you can do that, it will be well and good. Or if the agency demands, then you have to do so. Can you read this? Someone else?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Concise, precise, and simple language, originality and clarity, ABC rule, should exhibit analytical ability and communication skills of the researcher. Flowery language should not be used. Organization of ideas and writing skills matter a lot.
Yeah. So the research is written usually, or it has to be written very concisely. Sometimes there is a requirement that you have to meet 150 pages. So you start writing the stories, you stretching the language. No, it will be very boring for the reader. So it has to be concisely and precisely written in a simple language. Whoever be the audience, simple language will be appreciated. The originality is very important. When you are writing an article also, if you are just copying from others' work, you have 100 footnotes and nothing original in the research, nothing original in the article, nothing original in the report. Usually when it is an empirical study, of course, the chances are very less, because you have interviewed people, you might have made surveys, or you might have given the questionnaires, and the questionnaires you might have analyzed it, interpreted, and then you will be giving the result. Of course, there should be originality in that case. But even when you are doing a doctoral research, when you are writing an article also, you have to see that there are aspects of originality that you have included. It's original. Of course, you have borrowed ideas from somebody else here and there in order to build your arguments, in order to support your arguments, or some days in order to contradict also, as the case may be. But it's going to be original. That should be your focus. There should be clarity, because some days we say that the person is saying one thing and he has argument for some set of arguments on the one hand when you read a first chapter, and when you come to the next part of it, or in the same chapter itself, or when you move on to the next chapter, there you can say that the person has forgotten what all he has discussed, unnecessary repetition or contrary things he is stating. So it should not happen. So usually when different people work together and different people author different chapters, sometimes this problem may arise. So here, if you are a team leader, if you are the project director, if you are the principal investigator, then you have the duty to coordinate. Even if you say that, okay, we will be having 7 chapters and the 7 people will be working on the 7 chapters. You have to read all the chapters, because there should be some connection. There should be some transition. There should be no conflicting things. So in order to see that, the principal investigator or the team leader has a big duty to read from cover to cover the project and to ensure that it has got the transition, it has got the connection, and you are not contradicting anywhere. So the clarity is very important with respect to each and every idea that you are discussing, each and every point that you are discussing. And can anyone tell me what is this ABC rule? What is ABC rule? Am I not audible to you people?
Ma'am, you are audible.
Okay. So you might not be knowing what is ABC rule. A stands for accuracy, B stands for brevity, and C stands for clarity. Okay. So accuracy, brevity, and clarity. It is about all writing, not only about legal writing. So if you are attending any class on writing, communication skill, they all emphasize on ABC rule. So in a driving also you have ABC rule, accelerator, brake, and clutch. So likewise, ABC rule in communication, in writing, is that whatever you write should have accuracy, and whatever write, as I told you, concise and precise. In a very brief way, you have to give the idea. It's not in such a stretchy way. And of course, the clarity, as I told you, accuracy, brevity, and clarity, that should be always remembered in mind. And you should exhibit analytical ability and communication skills. Then, as I told you, it's simple language and try to avoid flowery languages, and organization of ideas, writing skills, etc. matter a lot when you attempt an article and when you write the project report. Here, when we talk about the tune, again, you recall whatever I discussed in my first slide. So there, the second bullet point in my first slide, I talk about the audience. You should always keep in mind when you write the report to whom you are writing this particular report. Who is going to read this particular report and who has to take action? Who all will be reading it? So accordingly, you have to set your tone, set your language. It may be expository, it may be descriptive, it may be persuasive, it may be narrative. And these are not watertight compartments. There can be overlapping. Okay, so there can be overlapping. But you keep the audience in your mind, the nature of your research problem in your mind, the objective of your research problem in your mind, and the suggestions and recommendations that you have made, that you have recommended and suggested in your topic in your mind, or in your research report, or in your article in your mind, and who has to take this take action, and who are all are the possible readers, and accordingly the tune will be set. Someone read the tips, please.
Yes, ma'am, I'll read. Tips. Develop a rough plan, attempt a draft, cross-check citations, maintain uniformity, arrange the supplementary materials in order, polish language, revise and rewrite, make free from grammatical error, proofreading and editing. It should be well crafted, Formal language, usually written in third person, use active voice, and lastly, target audience.
Yeah. So I don't think that any of these points requires any explanation from my side. If the persons who are listening to me requires any explanation or any clarification on any point, you can ask me. I will be happy to do that. Otherwise, these things already I have said here. I am just arranging in a proper way. That's it. So if any point you want me to explain, then I will be doing it.
No, ma'am, it's clear.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so I will be going to the next slide. But before that, you look at the third point, the second part of the third point, maintain uniformity. So here also, I would say that usually the particular journal for which you are writing an article or the particular agency who has entrusted you with the research project, they will tell you what will be the citation format that you have to use. You may use Blue Book, you may use OSCOLA, or you may use GILI format as the case may be. So accordingly, you have to use that particular format. So uniformity is automatically maintained. But suppose the agency has not told anything about what should be the citation style. So it is a particular journal that you have approached it, and the particular journal doesn't have a style sheet. So in such a situation, what you will be doing? You can follow any footnoting style that you are comfortable with. But again, I would say here that you keep your audience in mind. Suppose you are writing to an international audience in an international publication, and there you are using GILI, that which generally we use in India, Journal of Indian Law Institute. I don't think that that is a good decision because you have international readers in your mind. So better you go for Blue Book because internationally Blue Book is being used, or OSCOLA of Oxford University. So that's why I have told you the target audience, the last point that I have written here. So that is the thing that you have to always bear in mind before taking any decision here. So, and there is no harm if you develop your own style, whatever the readers can easily understand, but you maintain the uniformity. In one footnote, you have written author first and the title of the book second. And the second footnote, you are writing the title of the book first, then the author second. And third footnote, don't have the title of the book, only the author name and the year. I have seen all these things even happening from a very senior process also. You have an author, you have an year. But what is the book? The author might be having 10 books and 2 publications he may having in the same year. So how will you locate? I would call all this as irresponsible citation. No, we are not supposed to do incomplete and irresponsible citations. So whenever you do citations, it should be complete, it should be responsible, and it should be uniform. I am not explaining here because I told you when there is no hard and fast rule, but still we have a standard sequence. When we see the practice that are being adopted by various ministries and various departments and even various international organizations, it can be IMOs that also will give you some project works. It can be World Bank wherein you get, or it can be some committees of the United Nations from where again you may get. So you can UN also, as I told you, you may get projects. So I am telling you that if they are not giving you any format, what can be an ideal format that you can use? When you see the declaration certificate, you may think that whether I am talking about a dissertation. No, I'm not talking about a dissertation or a thesis, because now they all require an ethical declaration. Most of the agencies now insist that there should be an ethical declaration that you do when you conduct a doctoral research also and when you conduct a non-doctoral research also. So this declaration we need to give, and the certificate. The certificate, especially when the third parties are involved. In such a situation, you have to obtain a certificate from them in order to show that the data you have collected is for this particular research, and you have communicated them that they are being observed or data is collected for conducting this particular research. Because again, the ethical rule says if data have been collected to undertake a particular research, the same data cannot be used for another research without giving them intimation. Okay, all these things have more importance when we are talking about non-doctrinal research, but we should know that what are the changing paradigms that are happening in the non-doctrinal research as well. So then the remaining points I need not explain you. Then comes the main text. This all we have, I have explained you nicely. Introduction chapters, conclusions with the findings. And in findings also, they may ask you to give major findings and general findings. So general findings and major findings, it's always desirable that you bifurcate the general findings and major findings. Because when you are giving it to an authority also, they may not be giving all the 300 pages together. They may read the most relevant pages, then they may take an action. So you have to enable, by giving them the major findings, you will enable them what are the quick actions that they can take. Then you have your bibliography, and please don't make any haphazard effect in making this bibliography. There should be proper bifurcation as to primary sources, secondary sources, and bibliography. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between primary source and secondary source? Yes, it's a very silly question. Not asking teachers who
Ma'am,
always
primary sources are those which we collect from the field by our own effort, and secondary sources are those which we collect from already done research or from some report that is not done by us.
Sir, I am not asking about data. I am not asking about primary data and secondary data. It's sources, primary sources and secondary sources.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, it actually, primary source actually gives us the direct access to the subject of the research. And if we talk about secondary one, it is a second-hand information with respect to that subject of research.
Very good. So, in the legal field, can you give me explanation? You are a law faculty only, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Give me examples from the legal field.
Pardon?
Could you please give me example from our legal field?
For the primary sources.
Yeah, for primary sources as well as secondary sources.
Like, ma'am, primary sources are the laws, the statutes.
Yes.
And secondary sources may be the books.
Okay, thank
or the
you.
already available data. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So you have your constitution, you have all the statutes, and all the international legal instruments. Suppose I am referring to Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I am referring to a particular treaty, I am referring to a particular convention as the case may be. All this will fall under the primary sources, which no single person has created, but it is an authority. Like our legislature, it's an authority who has created this particular document. So the primary legal sources, the constitution, the international legal instruments, and all the statutes, and even the commission's report. It can be International Law Commission report or it can be Law Commission's report, which you will incorporate in these primary sources. And then there is another practice, which I always appreciate, that when you write the primary sources, I have seen many researchers bifurcating Indian material and foreign material. So you talk about primary sources of the international primary sources, then you talk about primary sources. We can right now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so we're explaining about the primary source and secondary sources, and I have told you you need to bifurcate your bibliography into primary sources, secondary sources, and when you write your primary sources, it's better way to do things are you can even bifurcate in primary source itself the foreign primary sources and your Indian primary sources. And when you talk about secondary sources, there also you can bifurcate. You can first talk about the books, then you can talk about articles, then you may talk about the newspapers, or then you may talk about other things as the case may be. Then now you have a third component in the bibliography, that is the bibliography, wherein you talk about with the complete link the websites that you have referred, this will be a good thing, because now it's almost impossible to conduct a research without referring to websites. And especially when during Corona times, when visiting physical library is impossible. And now many material is available on websites, and many institutions, our universities and colleges have subscribed to very good online resources, e-resources. For example, it can be Westlaw, it can be Heen Online, it can be Gestor, as the case may be, wherein lakhs and lakhs of even foreign and international journals are available. So I don't think that any one of us do research without referring to bibliography. And friends, when we refer to bibliography and when we write our footnote also, you please refrain yourself from not quoting to unauthenticated websites. I have seen even faculties are quoting from Wikipedia. What is the problem with the Wikipedia? You and me can edit this. It's not very big task making an editions, making an doing an editing or a correction in a Wikipedia. So the websites like Wikipedia, though it's highly informative, and many of times we will be reading the information about the very first information about certain things from Wikipedia. But still, we don't believe everything that you are finding in Wikipedia without referring to other websites. So when we are writing articles to journals, some foreign journals have given us instructions. You also might have experienced it when you write for international journals. So some instructions that I have received personally when I write articles to journals are that you are allowed to quote websites ending with the .org or ending with the country code domain name, or with the .edu or with the .ac. So I'm sure that you understood when I explained that, because ending with .ac means it is an academic institution website, because some academic credibility can be given. Ending with .edu, so it can also be an academic or educational institutions. Ending with .org, it's an organization, not something .com, wherein only commercial things are being taken place. It's not purely business, .org. Then it can be country code domains. So wherein usually you find the government websites wherein ending with .in or ending with .us or .uk, as the case may be. Okay, so it's not any websites that you can refer. Usually we don't take care of all this aspect. But when you are referring websites, unauthenticated websites, when you refer, websites like Wikipedia when you refer, so actually what happens, it will undermine the research that you have undertaken. So you refrain from doing all this. Even if you collect some information from there, you find another supporting information from other websites that can be quoted with the credibility. So when we prepare question papers also, so now you know that there are many universities, there are many organizations, because it's only every time we are outsourcing. So there are outsourcing agencies also that as academicians they approach us to prepare question papers for them. So it's very important for them that when you set a particular question paper, it should be 100% original. You cannot copy it from somewhere. Then you have to give the source from where this information can be cross-checked. So they don't allow you to quote anything from Wikipedia. They don't allow you to quote anything from .biz, .com, etc. It should be always .org or .ac, as the case may be. So these things also we should remember in mind. And when you collect material also, you try to collect material from such highly authentic websites, highly reliable websites, wherein you will get reliable and authentic informations. Then the similarity report. When I was giving the other day's session also, I told you that it has become mandatory now, not only when you are writing an academic paper for an academic degree. It's not only for dissertations, it's not only for theses, but when we are submitting an article, now many publishers, many universities and many institutions wherein they have running their journals, they insist that your article should accompany with a similarity report. So if the similarity report is more than 20%, many of the journals don't accept. And as I told you, when we go by UGC guidelines, it should be maximum 10% similarity what we can show. But of course, you have many items that can be excluded. So the 10% I tell you only after exclusion. So what all you can exclude already we have seen the other day. But I think as God sir had told me yesterday, there are some more faculty who have joined us who could not hear me the other day. So I will be quickly, I will be taking some 10 minutes to show you what are the important aspects of the ethical consideration. So these slides I might be taking 5 to 7 minutes only because I don't want to bore those persons who heard me already the other day. So we have to be very careful about academic integrity, research integrity, and intellectual honesty. When we are attempting a research report, when we are writing the research report, we always try to make it plagiarism free and without making any copyright violation. I'm not reading this slide. It is only to introduce. You read the first bullet point, and sorry for those who are attending today and already attended my session the other day. 2-3 slides, there will be repetitions. So the University Grant Commission Promotion of Academic Integrity and the Prevention Plagiarism of Our Educational Institutions and Regulations 2018, and Dr. Hosti sir has already briefed me that he has circulated this with all his colleagues and faculty. So you are aware about this. So you know that we should have a departmental academic integrity panel and institutional academic integrity panel, which can take disciplinary action not only against students but also against the faculty if they come to know that the faculty have engaged in academic misconduct practice, research misconduct practice, and plagiarized it and made copyright violations. So when we do the research similarity check, the 14 words together you can take up. And these underlined portions are where no similarity can be found, and there should be 0% similarity. Abstract, summary, hypothesis, observation, result, conclusion, and recommendation should be 100% original. And you can exclude many things. Otherwise, it is very impossible to bring down your similarity to 10%. So wherever you have quoted, but of course there should be a footnote that shows that from where that quotation is taken, your bibliography, references, preface acknowledgement, and wherever you have used your generic terms, whenever you talk about laws, whenever you talk about standard symbols, etc., etc., and when you reproduce a particular judgment, all these things are in the common knowledge. All these things are in the general information pool. So these things you can avoid while calculating the 10% rule. And already I have told you only 10% is permitted. So the second level, the next level is 10 to 40, then 40 to 60, then more than 60%. And when a faculty engage into this plagiarism, there can be even denial of annual increments. Even the supervisorship from that particular supervisor can be taken back, and he may not be given new scholars for 3 years, as the case may be. I have told you about the Singapore statement, wherein it insists that the research that we undertake and the report that we produce should always exhibit honesty, accountability, professional courtesy and fairness, and good stewardship. So in 2010, this was the first step taken by the Conference on Research Integrity, that they formulate something. For the first time, they have formulated certain rules that by which they obeyed themselves. They have promised that we will abide ourselves by this integrity principle. And then another development, you can find that in that particular Singapore statement, wherein they give emphasis on the researchers should keep clear and accurate record. It's very important today when we talk about the report writing. So after writing the report, you please don't discard the documents that you have used to develop your report. You have to keep it for some times, because any person may come for verification. Why you have come to this conclusion? Can you show us your data? So we should have set records with us for some time in order to verify it. If some agency asks us to do so, if some authority asks us to do so, or your own institute questions you, from where you have come to this conclusion. So you need to have all the supporting documents with you for some time. So, and in order to please your research agency, you please don't manipulate your result. Whatever be the finding, You should show only that finding as such, the intact finding as such. And as I have told you, if you have taken help from others, then you have to acknowledge them. Might be as research contributors, their research assistants, or sometimes might be as co-author. Whatever way they have helped you, in that way you have to acknowledge them. Then as I told you, if you know that there are certain people who engage into mispractice, the wrong practices and irresponsible research practices, you have a duty to inform this to the concerned authorities. And it is a duty of the institute to take action for academic and research misconduct. Then, as I told you, once you do the research, then and you write your report, then you have a duty to release that particular report to the world. As I told you, you have an audience in your mind. They have a right to read this. So you have to give the information to them. You have to disseminate your research report. So there should be honest presentation of result and transparent use of funds. And this is something new. I did not discuss the other day about this. Especially when you are conducting a non-doctoral research, because you have usually there are people to observe. You talk about the people, their relationship, their behavior. But you have to always remember in mind that yes, there is third party involved, but they have a human dignity. You have to respect their privacy and family life. And whenever you observe them, whenever you take in what you call information from them, whenever you question them, interview them, you have to tell them that you are doing a research and the interview is conducted for this purpose. The questionnaire is being distributed for this purpose. So you have a duty to inform them all about the research. So, and they will be participating in that particular research with the full information and giving their free consent. And whatever information that they give to you, you have a duty to maintain confidentiality. You don't forget your social responsibility while conducting this research. And I have told you the rule of limited reuse. If you have collected certain information for a particular research, then before reusing the same data, you have to intimate that particular third party who has interest in that, or from where you have gathered that particular data. Because you look at the third and fourth point, the duty to inform and research with consent. So the reuse of the data can be done only with information and only with the consent. Then you have to keep the data for the purpose of verification, but the moment the purpose is achieved, then you are not supposed to keep anybody's personal data with you in your report or in your record keeping section. Because I told you the human dignity, respect for their privacy and family life. So we cannot for any time, for such a long time, we are not supposed to keep their personal data. Only for that particular time, wherein there is a demand for your research purpose that the data should be preserved, you need to preserve the data, otherwise not longer than that. And especially for a vulnerable group and vulnerable groups, we need to have much respect. Because most of the time, even if we inform them, they may not be in a position to understand the complete, what you call the significance of research. What are its consequences and aftermath? They may not be in a position to appreciate that. And they may not be even in such a position that they can give an intellectual and mental consent. So when we say research with consent, sometimes it can be their guardians who give you consent, or you are doing a research for the senior citizens, wherein they cannot understand all the aspect of this. So at the same time, but we have to remember in mind as we are undertaking the research to help them in order to bring certain amendments for their welfare, or in order to show their pathetic situation. So whatever be the genuine objective that we have, we understand that and we appreciate on the one hand. But at the same time, please don't forget the fact that as vulnerable group or senior citizens, as the case may be, they also have their human dignity. They also have their rights. So always you give respect to that, and always to give a helping hand, you have to do this, not to exploit them. Yeah. So apart from the Singapore policy, I would like to introduce some other policies. The other day I could not do that because I have time constraints. So here I would say that at 2010 we have the Singapore Conference and Singapore Statement. In 2013 we have the Montreal Statement on Research Integrity, especially on cross-border research collaborations. And in 2015 we have the Amsterdam Agenda. The Amsterdam Agenda dealing with research integrity and its use in developing evidence-based policy. Agenda includes a registry of research on the responsible conduct of research. See, this RRCR. Then, which encourage researchers to plan, conduct, report, and share their research around the 6 key elements: problem, impact, intervention, hypothesis, assessment, and data sharing. So, these all are very big topics wherein I could spend hours and hours together in explaining all this. So I request those who are hearing me to take a note of these titles, that is Montreal Statement, Amsterdam Agenda, because all this information, if you do a Google search, you can find it in the internet. So you have to have some time, and though it may not be a general research wherein you will get all the information, you have to do a deep research. Then you can find out this information and you can read more about it and you can understand more about it. Because only by reading this slide, you will not get a complete understanding, a comprehensive understanding of the area that we are talking about. So what is problem here? What is impact here? What is intervention here? So even if I am going to take 1 hour, I cannot give you complete information, comprehensive information of all this. So I am just guiding you here. I am just introducing this concept to you today. And I request you to do your own personal research and reading to get more insight into this aspect. Then you have the Hong Kong Principle of 2019, which recognizes and reward researchers for their trustworthy research that strengthen research integrity by avoiding questionable research practices. Assess responsible research practices, value complete reporting, reward the practice of open science, and acknowledge a broad range of research activities and recognize essential other tasks like peer review and mentoring. Because research is not something that you can learn within a year or within a month, as the case may be. I will say it is a lifelong process. Every day you learn more things. When I talk to you, I get more things, I get more information from you. When you talk to me, you also get some insight from me. So likewise, when you interact with your peers, when you interact with your seniors, when you interact with the people from other countries, you will get more insights, you will get more information, you will get more enlightenment. So every day you learn new practices, every day you come to know that there are new developments happening in the world. There are certain associations wherein they give too much importance to research integrity and academic honesty. And these are the things and these are the measures that they have adopted. So if these are good for us, we can also adopt in our institutions. And in our personal research, we can practice all these things because that will give you more intellectual honesty, that will give you more academic integrity, that will give you more research integrity. Because as I told you, we have decided to stay in academics. So only as teachers, we cannot stay here. The teacher, a good teacher is always a good researcher also. So we have to do research and we have to guide the students who come to us. Hundreds and hundreds of students every year they come to us in order to do their project, in order to do their assignment, in order to do their dissertation, and also they also want to become publishers. They want to publish articles, they want to publish books. So always they come to us in order to take tips from us, advice from us. So if you are not aware of these good practices, we cannot give them information, we cannot guide them properly. So in order to guide them, supervise them properly, we should always have updated information. So I request you to read even the Hong Kong Principles, which will give you more insights. And lastly, this I have intimated last time also when I was addressing you, the NESH guidelines. As I am telling you, very beautiful guidelines because it's especially dealing with the social sciences and law. So the research ethics, they define the research ethics itself as the codification of scientific morality in practice. And I am sure nobody will wonder here, we are law teachers, then why we should talk about science? Because research itself is scientific. There can be no research that can be unscientific. A scientific and systematic inquiry only is known as research. So if that's the case, We all should know about this research ethics, and we all should read these niche guidelines also. Because apart from the 2018 UGC guidelines, we don't have anything in India which we can give you in a concrete form. Okay, you read this, you will understand what is research integrity. You will understand what is the concept of conducting a more ethical research. No, we don't have any other document. So that's they have introduced the Singapore statement, Amsterdam guidelines, Hong Kong guidelines, etc., etc. So the niche guidelines also, it's very important as it's talking about conducting doctoral research, conducting doctoral research, non-doctoral research. What are the ethical considerations that the researcher should keep in mind? And while reporting, while writing the report also, what are the aspects that we have to remember in our mind? Okay, so with this, I complete my slides. And if you have some doubts, you can ask me now.
Ma'am,
Thank you so much, ma'am.
good afternoon. Good afternoon, ma'am. I have a question. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, when you were talking about bibliography, we have seen there are various tools for the bibliography like Mendeley and all. Do we use these kinds of tools in law researches also? Because research is same in all the domains and disciplines, but
Yes, yes,
unfortunately, we have not seen that
yes,
work here.
yeah, we can use that software. So especially, I personally, I don't use much, but I am aware that because many of my scholars use this, and very easily you can convert from one form to other form. Because if it is Blue Book, you can just click Blue Book form will come. You can opt for OSCOLA form will come. But the thing is
Yes.
that they already what all recorded, that only you can convert. There are, because it's all are in the sense wherein they have the information about the book already is there, the information about the case is already there. But if it is a new
Right.
material, of course, it cannot give you an automatic result. So you cannot have 100% reliability on this. Something you have to create, something you have to generate. But wherever the system, the what you call the app itself gives you the answer, well and good, there is no problem. In my department, the students are using it.
All right. Okay, ma'am. Another question, ma'am, I have not exactly, but a parallel question to the research idea. That, ma'am, at times as faculty, when we guide our students for research projects and dissertations, our research articles also, there we've seen that students, though despite the faculty have given the tremendous efforts to create that paper. I mean, do teachers have, can ask the students like it should be co-published? Because though of course teacher has their, they put up their efforts and guided student in such a, it is quite deviated question, but it triggers in my mind, ma'am. I need a answer for this from your side. That can we ask students for it? Because the collaboration from the teacher side is also a worthy one.
I did not get a specific question from you. Whether your specific question is it ethical to co-publish a paper with a researcher?
Student, with the researcher, with the student, where the teacher have, because there is no such policy as such from the institutes that student will bound to, follow or give a declaration that they will be publishing with their guides or mentors.
As far as my knowledge goes, in law discipline, I haven't seen any university wherein such a practice is existing, wherein they are bound to publish with their teacher. No, I haven't come across any such universities in India. If you have something, you have come across some universities, you can correct me and you can tell me, no, there is such a university where it is mandatory that they have to co-publish with the teacher, then only their PhD requirements will be complete. I don't know any such universities in India. But I know universities in other disciplines, in computer science and other sciences, wherein it is a practice that they co-publish with their guides and it is mandatory. Because especially in sciences wherein they have to do their research, their laboratory research, and the teachers also will be spending time with them. And most of the contributions the teachers also do. So they generally have. But as far as I told you, in law universities, we generally don't see that guidelines or requirements, but it is a common practice that guides are co-authoring with the scholars, with their mentees. And
Right.
as long as the contribution of the guide is there, I don't find it problematic. and I am basically an intellectual property teacher. So if I look at the particular issue from the intellectual property perspective, if you have to call a person as a joint author, the contributions of both the authors should be like that, wherein you cannot separate one person's contribution from the other person's contribution. This is what the definition of joint authorship in copyright law says. So if I have asked my mentee, you write a chapter. So the person has written 30-page article and came to me. Then I say that very beautiful chapter, you add my name and publish. Here you tell me, do I entitled to be called as a co-author? No. Are you getting my point?
No.
Because the child has done everything. And as a
Right.
mentee, I am using my influence, I am using me as a mentor, I am using my authority, I am using my position, and I say that you publish. And the child publishes. But it was totally unethical if I have done it. But it is ethical only when you have contributed to it. You also have taken pain to write this. You discuss together, you develop the idea, you develop everything, and both of us, and both the persons, 1 or 2 or 3 persons who all are there in the joint venture, in the joint authorship, they contribute. But if the contribution is not there, then it is not only with respect to mentees, with anyone. Some days even I have seen the senior teachers, the senior professors tell the juniors who are the just entries in the just as a assistant professor, you have come there, and the senior professor tells, okay, so you write an article and we can publish it in our name. If you
True,
publish,
ma'am.
nobody, if you write, nobody will publish because nobody knows you, everybody knows me. So if you write and you add my name, our article will go to publication next week. So let us do that. So such things are also taking place, but I don't find any merit in that.
I mean to say, yes, ma'am, you're right, ma'am, you're right. But I mean to just say that, ma'am, when the teachers are duty bound to, guide the students, their mentees. So there is no such reverse policy. Of course, as a mentor, as a teachers, we are bound to guide our students. But at times, this has also been observed that students are, they take up, and we are not, we feel helpless and said that we have guided the student too long. So this is what we have seen even the PhD level also, that we have been asked to publish the paper with our guides. So that was my question, ma'am. So there is.
So what I am telling is, if you simply because of the reason that they have guarded you in their research, that is not giving them any entitlement to demand for co-publication. Because writing a paper is different from doing the research. And even if writing a paper and publishing it, or presenting a paper in your conference, etc., might be certain preconditions and prerequisite in many universities to grant a PhD. Like in our University School of Law and Legal Studies, also it is compulsory. But nowhere it says it should be a joint publication.
Co-publication.
It
should not be a co-publication.
Yeah. So no, there is
actually,
no that it should be a co-publication.
No, right. But normally, what has been happened?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Normally, what has been happened that in almost all the cases, the PhD scholars used to publish along with their guides.
So I am telling that as such there is no wrong in it, but in order to call a person as a joint authorship, there should be contribution, sufficient contribution, equal contribution, that should be there. Just giving idea is not contribution. Or just telling them that, okay, use my name and give it to this particular journal, they will accept by saying my name, that is not contribution. Okay, so even if the child volunteers, madam, I am going to add your name, but you have to see what contribution you have done. If there is no contribution, please ask the child not to use your name. And if you have given contribution, you have contributed immensely and equally, then of course you entitle for that joint authorship and then you claim it.
Right. Thank you, ma'am.
Right, ma'am.
Yes. Another question. If any other questions?
Any other questions from the participants?
Sir, I was again going through your brochure today, and I'm happy that you had many sections on even ICT, MOOCs, life skills, legal research methodology, and all. It's nice that you are giving them updated information on all these topics, and MOOCs and other things are very recent in this sense. Now it's compulsory that every colleges and every university should adopt this. So it's good that you have sessions on all these topics, and especially like the topic on life skills. It's very important. And even I had not time, otherwise I would have loved to attend such sessions.
Okay, ma'am. So, Shireen,
Yes.
I think there is no more question.
Yes, sir. So, thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful session and such an elaborated one. Honestly, whenever we see such slides and such elaborate lectures, they actually help us, the young people, to, have that kind of right guidance. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out your precious time. So I thank everybody, every participant for being there with us. Now I would invite Dr. Ghosh to kindly say a word of thanks for ma'am.
Basically, I feel honored that on a one-day notice, Professor Lucas has agreed to give this particular topic, deliberation on this topic. Actually, on the very first day, while we are, Professor Lisa ma'am has came before us and discuss about the ethical part. From that day, I was in the idea that let I identify a scope for ma'am to discuss this one, because this is very much needed part. So thank you, ma'am, from our I say core of heart. We are really I say feel cherished to get this type of knowledge from a professor like you. We want that in future also we will get support from your side. Thanks a lot, ma'am, for this wonderful session.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Actually, I am honored when I was asked to engage this session. As I told you, today we had academic council meeting. So in the morning half, we were very busy. So I could not excuse myself in the morning half. That's why I have requested you to the afternoon session. It's always a pleasure to come and interact with your faculty, because we also learn by taking the classes and then by preparing. So the encouragement and enthusiasm people like Anup Ghosh sir gives, that's what sustains us in our profession. Okay, so thank you, sir. Thank you so much for all intellectual stimulation. Thank you so much, and thank you all for all my faculty.
Thank you,
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, participants.
I can leave, no?
Yes, ma'am.